Joining us right now to discuss working with the Trump administration on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is Congressman Richard Neal of Massachusetts. He's the lead Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee. And, sir, thank you for coming in today.
Delighted to be with you.
Let's talk a little bit about the House Ways and Means Committee. It is such an important committee because it shapes the tax code, and there's a lot you can do with that.
Mentioned in the Constitution, as the term implies, the ways and means of raising the revenue to administer the government. All revenue measures have to originate in the House of Representatives. And within the House, they have to originate in the Ways and Means Committee. Tax, trade, Social Security, Medicare, tax side of Medicaid, pensions, welfare, and management of the public debt. Not bad.
President Trump has come out, and in less than 24 hours, he's already put a slew of executive actions into place. They have an agenda that they have really thought through because he knows how Washington works now. He's had 4 years to sit out and kind of think about how the world has changed and evolved. He has a very thin majority in the House, though, and I just wonder what happens. Will the Democrats work with him when it comes to the tax cuts? Are there going to be big battles that take place? Are they going to have to do this entirely within their conference? How are things shaping up?
Well,
right
I think
now?
it's hard for them to make the argument simultaneously that they're concerned about the national debt and then to propose adding $4 trillion to the national debt through a tax cut. Now, yesterday, at a moment that should have been one, I think, of civic engagement, acknowledge the challenges the country faces. At the same time, acknowledge that bipartisanship with small majorities really is going to be important. But then also to point out to everybody that if you're serious about the national debt, you can't say that the people that are sitting on the dais yesterday need a tax cut. And I think we would adhere to the position that a tax cut for middle-income people makes a good deal of sense, and sticking with that ought to be the posture of the administration. These proposals will come to Capitol Hill, and it's not going to be as easy as they suggest it is. There is a very complicated process that they're going to have to go through, and that's what committee structure is for.
To be fair, neither party, from the leaders of the party, have really talked about fiscal responsibility. That was not something we heard in the election.
No, but I'm glad you raised that because I could take you to the long conversation back to the Bush tax cuts in 2001 and 2003. That's $2.3 trillion. And this last tax cut, TCJA,
2017,
they borrowed the money for it. Can you imagine borrowing $2.3 trillion to give a tax cut? When you look at the distribution tables, overwhelmingly, it went to people in the higher income brackets. Tax relief, if it's to happen, should go to people in the middle, as we demonstrated with pandemic relief. So how did we get there, which is worthy of a doctoral dissertation? But the tax cuts have contributed mightily to the national debt.
The issue is, though, elections have consequences. The Republicans won, and they're going to be driving the debate on this. We had a CNBC All-America survey that surveyed Americans, 1,000 Americans, and asked them what happened. 59% of them put tax cuts for individuals as their top priority for 2025. If the TCJA is not repassed, it will mean a tax increase for Americans across the board.
Well, as you noted earlier, that's what the committee structure is for. That's what negotiation is about. There wasn't anybody who was expecting to see the corporate tax rate in America go from 35.5% to 21%. The Ways and Means Committee, during my time as chairman, we put it out at 26.5%, and nobody was squawking. Right. It was a pretty interesting moment. I mean, cap gains at 28%. I do think that the top rate for individuals ought to go back to 39.6%. Those are Clinton rates. Those are Obama rates. Those are reasonable rates.
The individual deduction. I know you've made the point that the tax cuts of 2017 were really skewed to wealthier Americans, that they're getting the biggest benefit of that when you put context on it. But the standard deduction increased pretty mightily. It went from $6,500 to $12,000 immediately, and I think for 2025 it's $15,000. That is something that every American would notice pretty quickly if that reverted to the pre-2017 numbers.
Yeah, and actually you could make the argument that logically it extends simplification.
Right.
That's another important consideration. So I think that, again, there's room there in the national conversation to talk about these issues and not to universally condemn what was done, but to say, look, when you look at who got what, that's a very different argument.
How will things work in committee? How do Democrats and Republicans work together on that committee? Do you expect it to be a little more give and take, or is this...
Well, we tend not to have bomb throwers on there. I think that's one of the jobs of the leadership, to make sure that you have people that I'd like to describe in the Democratic side that are within the mainstream of economic thinking. Tax policy has consequences. I think that the argument that was fostered on this country many years ago, that tax cuts pay for themselves, is nonsense. You can't find an economist who will say that, a mainstream economist who will say that. And I think that, again, back to the argument that was offered earlier, how do you keep talking about the national debt, which the bond market is starting to pay some attention to?
Yes, we have seen higher yields that have come through.
And then simultaneously say that the best way to cut the national debt is to borrow $4 trillion for more tax cuts? I don't understand the logic.
Do you think in the end there will be cooperation with Democrats, at least on the committee level? Or do you think this is a my way or the highway situation?
The last tax bill that was put out, I actually supported it. And I supported it because I thought you could make the argument that it actually enhanced the child credit.
It did. Yeah.
Now, where Democrats would be on it, no. But did it enhance it? And the answer is yes. But it also enhanced the low-income housing tax credit, which was an important consideration. Yeah. And I think when you look at the different credits that were in that package, it made sense. It passed the House. And Democrats voted for it. So there was a bipartisan agreement.
Lines, right?
Well, the problem was that the Senate rejected it out of hand. And the new argument that the senators are making, which is, by the way, pretty strange to me, they're saying that the baseline no longer counts, that you can ignore the baseline for tax cuts. That's like essentially saying that, OK, we'll just forget about the $3.5 trillion that was borrowed. We'll just put it in a place where nobody's going to find it. Try running your household like that.